Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is Joel Hunter teaching Philosophy of World Religions, Philosophy 210. You see it right there on the board at Truckee Meadows Community College. Glad you're here, glad you could show up. I'm hopeful that a bunch of you can come and show up a little later, and that we can have a better crowd from the class show up. I'm really hopeful that more folks can come live. We're going to find that time. I know it. But thanks for coming in, and I appreciate the hearts already coming in. Yes, excellent. Glad you're here. I'm in a different setting today. I don't actually have my mic. I went off and I forgot it. So I'm having to shout just a little bit so that you can hear me into the phone. I'm sorry the sound isn't of great quality, but hopefully that won't detract too much from what we're going to cover today. So let me just give you our agenda for our time today. Very simple. I want to talk to you just a little bit about your reading, which is going to be in a different book than what you've been reading so far. And you're okay, great. Thank you, Zach. I appreciate you saying that that you can hear me. So good. Well, I think that's good, but we'll find out. Yeah. So we're going to cover your reading, which is the Hindu scriptures. There are selections from the Vedas, from the Upanishads, from the Bhagavad-Gita, and then some of the mystic sages of different epochs, but one from the Middle Ages, and then a couple from the 19th century, and one who lived into the 20th century. Your author calls those grace notes, those other writings, because they're not technically scripture, but they are sort of embedded in the scriptural worldview of Hinduism, which that's what you're going to be reading about in the primary sources of all things. So this is going to be different than reading about commentary about the religion. Now you're going to read what has actually been said by adherents to this religion. And I think it'll be eye-opening to you. It's one thing to hear somebody talk about it. It's quite another to hear it in its own words. So we're going to talk about that briefly. And then what I want to do with the bulk of our time is I want to talk about our analysis response assignment. And part of that is I want to go over the model with you, the model that you'll be using, applying to Hinduism, and how to go about doing that. So let's get to it. Boy, it's great to see a few more people showing up, I think, in the past. Maybe a few more will chime in as we get a little further in. But let me start with your reading. So I mentioned already that the reading is from the Hindu scriptures themselves, or some of the selection of the Hindu scriptures, a very small selection of the Hindu scriptures. But they're in this book here, The World's Wisdom. So you need your second text for this one. And it's in the early part of the text, the first part of the text. That's kind of that it corresponds with your Houston Smith text. And there is what he does is he steps through these scriptures basically chronologically. And so he starts with the earliest ones that we know of, and then moves into the Upanishads, which are later, and then finally the Bhagavad-Gita, which is part of an amazing epic poem called the Mahabharata. Ooh, easy to say. And this is just a huge epic poem, sort of in the style. If you've read Homer and the Iliad, I mean, it's kind of the Bhagavad-Gita tells a story about war, about battle. What's interesting in this text, in that text, is that you have somebody who wants to be a faithful practitioner, a follower of this way, and finds that the requirement to be nonviolent, there's a conflict there because he's expected to lead a battle. And so that's what the selection is drawing from the Gita, which tells the story of Arjuna. All right, so your text then is going to be, these different selections. Now, what is going to be helpful to you is that these are rich with the elements that you can quote from for doing your analysis response. You're welcome to use the Houston Smith text as your primary one for completing the analysis response, but you don't have to. In fact, you're going to find that there are some very, very rich expressions of the very principles, the key claims that are in the model in these scriptures. I'm going to just point to one of them for you. For those of you who showed up or are watching the replay, you get a bonus because I'm going to point out, I think, one of the best expressions for what Hindus believe about the unseen order, and that is one of the key claims, is in the Veda number 5. It's on pages 6 through 7, and there's I can just read the whole thing because it is so full of this expression of what the unseen order is, and even the difficulties of expressing that, of how language is inadequate to describe the unseen orders as Hindus conceive it. And that's a remarkable thing. It's not something that we struggle with necessarily in the sensible order, that is the realm of the senses. We have lots of language to tell us about that. But this unseen order, that is at the very root of everything, that is the ultimate reality in Hinduism. You're at a loss for words almost, but in this Veda, there's some beautiful ways that this is at least indicated, pointed to help us grasp, what they think is the unseen order. And the one of the things that is really fascinating is how this selection ends. And if you read, this is on page 7. If you have your book, you can open up page 7. Then he's talking about, or the Veda is talking about that one, and that one is a nameless deity. It's hard sometimes to tell whether it's a personal or impersonal deity, but it's clear that, or clear most of the time, that it's dealing with a personal deity, someone we could relate to. But at the end of this selection, this is where it says, "Whence all creation had its origin, he, whether he fashioned it or whether he did not, he who surveys it all from highest heaven, he knows. Or maybe even he does not know." That ambiguity in Hinduism is quite remarkable. And it is, what that is expressing is not this sort of, well, I know that one so well that I can express, that one's inability to express himself as the origin of everything. No, it's not saying that. It's saying I don't even know how to express how that one would have something like knowledge. And so what I have to end by saying is, maybe he knows, whence all creation had its origin, or maybe he doesn't. But whether or not he does, that one is the ultimate reality. And that one then is the ground for everything else, is the ground for the unseen order and for the seen order, and toward which Hinduism points us as the goal of life, is to be in union with that one. Okay, well, you've got a lot of other texts in the assignment for this week that were also rich, but I wanted to at least point that one to you, that you've got a lot that you could talk about in filling out your model for Hinduism from these readings for this week. So feel free to use those in addition to your Houston Smith text. Okay, so I mentioned that. And by the way, this is a bonus. I promise I won't take up too much time with this, but I couldn't help it. Let me see if I can find it real quick. The Katha Upanishad. So this is in the second group of scriptures, the Upanishads. Yeah, this is pages 10 through 11, so not much further along. But there's a really cool story about Nachiketa and his encounter with death, or the god of death, Yama. And for you, this is another Harry Potter reference, folks. If you get into this and it's all of a sudden dawns on you, wow, he gets these 3 wishes, and he's having this conversation with death. Wow, that sounds a lot like Tales from the Beedle the Bard and the 3 brothers. And if you think that, then I did too. And I was thinking, wow, I think I'd like to write something about that. So maybe I'll write about the Katha Upanishad and Harry Potter. We'll see. Anyway, there's a lot there, and so enjoy those readings, and I hope that it becomes more of a Hinduism becomes to you now not just the the set of facts that have been presented to you in Houston Smith's text, but more of a living thing. You can see or get some appreciation for what it's like to be inside that religion. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about your reading. Let's move on then to your assignment, the analysis response assignment. So your job is fairly straightforward. You use the model. That's in a separate handout, the model for religions. I think I call it Analytical Model for Religions or something like that. And in it are 10 points. They're in 2 groups, and the first group are the central principles. There's 3. And then the second group are 7 key claims. And what you're going to do is you're simply going to write up a document in whatever kind you want, but write up a document that names what each of the parts of the model are that you're responding to, and then identify some textual evidence to support what you think the answer is. How you think, say, the unseen order is described. How is it conceived in Hinduism? And cite some text to help you develop that description. Okay. And next is how long? How long is it supposed to be? It is supposed to be. There we go. I thought I turned notifications on. Okay. The whole thing should probably be around 300, 400 words, I suspect. It really shouldn't go on too long. You don't have to go into a lot of explanation, but particularly if you quote the scriptures, you need to do a little bit of interpretation, a little bit of unpacking of how you think the concepts like the human predicament or the unseen order or purification, of getting sort of morally on the right path, how those elements that are in the model, if you see those in the scriptures, you might have to do a little interpretation to explain, what you think they mean and how they answer those components in the model. Okay, so that's the assignment in a nutshell. It's just simply to make a list, a 10-point list, and to give a brief explanation for what you think the central principles are the 3 central principles are in Hinduism, and the 7 key claims, and some evidence, some text to back it up. That's all you got to do, and type that up and get it submitted by the end of the week, and we're good to go. That, I believe, is worth 5% of your grade. Yeah, we have 6 analysis assignments throughout the semester, and each one is worth 5%. So do make sure that you do it and get it in on time. So one thing, let me see if I can find my note here that I have written out ahead of time. So I just want to mention the 3. I want to start with the 3 central principles because those are really key. And you'll find more than likely some overlap between the principles and some of the claims, and that's okay. But you may find the explanation that I give in the model handout helpful for understanding, what specifically you should be focusing on for each of the 10 things. But what I want to do is just briefly hit on the 3 central principles. And the first one is the human predicament. So the claim is that all religions recognize that human beings, all humans, are in this predicament. Well, what is this predicament? The predicament is a state of disorder that, as the quote I have in the handout says from Danny Glover in Grand Canyon, it's not supposed to be this way. It's an insight and intuition that there's something deeply flawed and deeply unsatisfactory about human life as it sort of naturally is. And if you don't experience that generic wretchedness, that misery, then, well, good for you, first of all, and that might be a reflection of certain kinds of privileges we have. But if you don't experience that predicament firsthand, then you have to sort of think about, well, there are more than just, 21st century Westerners here in the world and have been in the world and will be in the world. There are people, fleeing war and famine, and sometimes they don't make it. You have people that are dispossessed, that have no home. There's plenty of wretchedness in the world. That's not a big it's not a big stretch to recognize that. And so what religions are trying to do in just pointing out that humans are in this predicament is trying to understand what is the cause of all of this wretchedness. Where is the source of it? And that is what you should be looking for. So what does Hinduism have to say about the predicament humans are in? And what is the cause for our state of disorder? Whether that is internal, whether I just feel like a wreck, whether I have just a tendency to muck things up, or whether I just look more outside of myself and I look around, maybe in my life or maybe in my community or maybe across the world, what accounts for this wretched state that humans find themselves in? Why do we think that it shouldn't be that way, or some do? And why do we find it radically deficient, human life just as it is? So that is the first part of the model. That is the human predicament. That is the first central principle, is the recognition of that. And then I gave you some idea of, well, what if I don't feel that? Well, I mean, what you're doing is you're trying to develop some objectivity here and sort of step outside your own skin and see, around the world how this might look and how they might express it. Okay, so the second insight is that. Let me just sum that up. So the first insight is that it shouldn't be this way, right? That's the Danny Glover line. The human predicament is the insight that it shouldn't be this way. And the need for salvation, the second principle, is saying, and it doesn't have to be this way. So the need for salvation is this recognition that we aren't necessarily stuck in this predicament, that there is a way to get past this predicament. There is a way to be saved from this predicament, to be rescued from this predicament, to escape. I mean, who can fault a prisoner? If you feel like a prisoner in life, then who can fault you for wanting to escape? That's rational, right? So it's understandable why people who experience this sort of wretchedness and misery would be wanting to hear that, hey, guess what? It doesn't have to be this way. Yes, it is this way, but it doesn't have to be this way. And so here is this intuition that there is a need then for salvation, and that there is that this deeply unsatisfactory life is not all there is or all that's possible. In fact, there is a higher life, a life that is something other than what we normally experience within the human condition, within the human predicament. That there is this alternative, this other way to live, that is the escape from, or the rescue from, or the salvation from the human predicament. And so what does Hinduism say about this higher life? And that's what you are going to answer in the second principle then, is this intuition of the need for salvation. Okay, because here's the rub, is that if I'm just floating along in the human predicament and I'm just wretched and I'm not aware that there is this possibility of a higher life, then I'm not going to see then that it doesn't have to be this way. I may be sort of nihilistic and say, well, that's just the way it is. There's just no other way around it. And so what's deeply important about that need for salvation to get out of the religion when you're examining it is, how do they express how we can miss out on it? What is it about our normal natural condition as we are that makes it such that we might miss out on that better life, that higher life? Okay, so that's number two. That's central principle number two. And then the third principle is the religious insight and remedy. So not only is there this higher life, but here's the way to this higher life. So the remedy starts talking about techniques. So, one way, and there's a philosopher named, or is he a political scientist? I can't remember now. Anyway, a thinker, a scholar named Stephen Prothero, who wrote a book a few years ago And he talks about this structure to religions with a three-part structure, and that is all religions talk about a problem, all religions talk about a solution to that problem, and then all religions offer techniques to implement that solution. So that's also a helpful way to think about, you know, the model that I've given you here. And so this third point, the third principle, then is talking about the way that we perceive, first of all, our need, and then how we attain that higher life. You know, how do we determine, how do we see those techniques that are going to deliver us from our predicament, from the human predicament? Okay, so that third principle then talks about the religious insight into our perception of how we discover that we're in a human predicament, of our need for salvation, and then the remedy, then the way to attain that salvation. Okay, so those are your three central principles, and so you can go through Hinduism and see what it has to say about those principles, and see if you can, you know, put it in a nice, pithy, concise way as best as possible. Then you have some other parts to it that get, you know, your 7 key claims that follow the 3 principles. You know, there'll be some overlap there with what you've already done in the 3 principles, but the last 2 items will be talking more about the techniques. So in Hinduism, of course, you're going to be talking about yoga in some point, because that is the practice then by which we attain that higher life, by which we pursue this kind of salvation, if we can call it that. All right, so that's the analysis response assignment. That's the model and how you use it. And so just write it up with that 10-part structure. You know, write a brief response, you know, to what you think Hinduism says about each thing, and then a quote to back up your position. All right, I think that's all I've got. Do you all have any questions now? I've learned that, you know, this thing probably beams into space and back, so probably 7-second delay is called for here. So I'm just going to blab, and if you have questions, just go ahead and formulate them now. You know, do the 2 question marks and then your name in all caps, and put your question in, and I'll try to answer it. So anybody left here who has a question? Okay. Timothy asks, how detrimental would it be if we went over the 500 words? Well, I mean, the pain would all be on your side, Timothy, because I can scan and skim, and I can get to the heart of what you're saying. If you have to, and you feel like you want to say more, that's absolutely fine. Sometimes you have to say more in order to really get to what you want to say, and you know, editing can come later. That's fine if it goes over 500. I'm just giving you a target that I think it would take to do a good job, to get a good grade on this assignment. I don't think it should take more than 500, but if it does, it does. You know, go with it, run with it. That's fine. But yeah, just be aware. You know, if you're just not sure how much to write, how much not to write, this is the sort of thing I'm looking at. If you break it down then into, by the way, I was not including the quotes. You know, the number of words. I wasn't including the quotes in that. I guess I should clarify that. Yeah, so you have what you write is what I'm really looking for, and what I'm looking for there is the text, the prose, how you express your ideas about the model and what Hinduism has to say about the model, and then the quote is sort of backing that up. So what I'm thinking, 300 to 500 words are 300 to 500 words of your own, if that makes sense. So I could see that, like, if you did a total word count with the quotes, you might go over that. Yeah. Okay. Good question, though. Any other questions? Great. Good. Yeah. So there's 10 parts to the assignment, and if you break 500 words down, so that's 50 words per section. That's not a lot. You know, that's a couple good sentences, and that seems like a lot to me. Then you tack on the quote to that. Any other questions? All right. Well, for those of you catching the replay, fire those questions off to me by email, and I will get in touch with you this week for sure, so that you can get a head start on this assignment. I hope you enjoy it. I think you will learn more about the religion and each religion that we do by going through this exercise, and that will solidify your knowledge of each religion, and it will also help you then when we get to the final exam. You're very welcome. I missed who said that, but thank you. You're welcome. And great. Well, I'm going to sign out then, and I will catch you all next week and talk to you later. See you.